Story 1. Ghostwriter. There's a special kind of humiliation in clawing your way out of obscurity, only to slip and feel gravity drag you down again. Cat Green knew that shame better than most. Nobody cared if you fell from a skyscraper. Nobody even bothered to look up. At 16, she'd written her first novel in a caffeine-fueled haze of naive bravado, and it had detonated. Over 1 million sold, a Goodreads fantasy nominee, HarperCollins, a rabid swarm of teenage fans. She'd convinced herself it would always be that easy. Now, at 21, she was chasing shadows, praying for the lightning to strike again, before everything she'd built crumbled beneath her. The latest review still pulsed behind her eyes, impossible to shake. I read the Red Moon Wolf series in high school and was obsessed. I picked up the second book and it was just okay, but this, how did this get published? What a snooze fest. I got it on audiobook and nearly drove off the road. It was so boring. Ugh. Subplots that went nowhere, pointless conversations, and not even the tiniest bit of spice. And don't get me started on how she glamorized domestic abuse. DNF. I really think this author has lost me forever. Sad. Bookraven 9. Screw you, Bookraven 99, she thought, but the words clung to her ribs like thorns. There were hundreds like it now, all echoing the same disgust. Tears burned her eyes as she rolled down her car window and pressed the buzzer at the gate. The speaker sputtered, then a too cheerful woman's voice sliced through the darkness. "Welcome to Reed's Writer's Retreat. Access code, please." 77758, Kat said, surprised she'd even remembered. Grief had shredded her memory into confetti. The iron gates yawned open with a groan straight out of a Gothic novel. "Pull forward and turn right. You're in Building 7A. Enjoy your stay, and let the creativity flow," the voice chirped. Kat drove in, forcing herself to look at the scenery. Pines pressed in tightly, mountains hunched in the distance, the grass outside too green, too perfect. Cozy-looking lodges dotted the grounds, golden windows glowing with soft, artificial light. It should have been beautiful. Maybe it was. But the quiet pressed down, suffocating, as if the trees themselves were watching. She needed this next book to work, needed it like breath. Most of her money had evaporated paying for her mother's treatments. Now she was the only one left to carry the scraps of their life. Even this trip was paid for with the last of her mom's life insurance. It wouldn't last. She felt a peculiar guilt as she passed women in pristine yoga gear, clutching mats, drifting like ghosts along winding trails. They looked wealthy, but their faces were pinched, hollowed out by something she recognized, quiet desperation. Maybe they were chasing lightning too. Her assigned lodge loomed, set back from the others, half swallowed by shadow. The parking lot was empty. Maybe she'd have the place to herself. Huge windows leered out at her, their glass smeared with grime. The lawn was clipped but thirsty, and unlike the other cabins, there was no cheerful wreath at the door, just a dead one, the color of rust. She stepped inside. Her boots sank into a faded Persian rug. 2 stories of bookshelves loomed overhead, crammed so tightly with battered spines and cracked leather that the air smelled of dust and mildew. Worn chairs slumped beneath dangling lamps that flickered and buzzed like trapped flies. From somewhere to her left, voices drifted, loud, urgent, with a brittle edge. Kat dumped her bag, let the suitcase clatter to the floor, and followed the noise. Down a corridor and through wide doors, a group, mostly women, sat at a scarred wooden table. Everyone had a typewriter in front of them. The air reeked of old paper, coffee turned sour, and musky armpits. A tall, elegant woman stood at the dust-filmed window, sunlight catching in her amber hair, which hung in a razor-sharp bob. She wore blue glasses and a sapphire dress, and her smile was a little too wide, as if her mouth had been carved that way. "Try harder, gang. You need to create characters that explode off the page. Is that really so much to ask?" Her voice dripped with syrupy southern charm, but it was sharp underneath, like honey laced with glass. She stopped mid-lecture and glided over to Kat, her footsteps utterly silent on the warped boards. She reached for Kat's arm, and a chill like ice water shot up Kat's spine, making her muscles twitch. She stepped back quickly, and her heart started beating fast. "Oh, hello," the woman said in happy voice. "I have been waiting for you. Okay, everyone, this is our newest guest name, Catherine Green. I am Beatrix Reed, your host. Would you like to tell us a little about yourself?" Kat froze and started feeling nervous. This was supposed to be an isolated retreat. She hadn't paid for group workshops or forced socializing, just solitude, nature, and anonymous critiques. It's Kat, actually," she managed. "I'm working on the third book in my Red Moon Wolf trilogy, and She trailed off. There was nothing else. Writing was all she had left. Most of the group stared, glassy-eyed, a few offering stiff, puppet-like smiles. There were 2 middle-aged men and 4 women, with one who didn't look much older than her. They looked like her kind of people, rumpled shirts, stained jeans, hair wild and neglected. And yet, their skin had a dull, waxy pallor, and they hunched over their typewriters as if chained to them. Why typewriters? Why did they all look so hollowed out? A young woman with almond skin and a jagged pixie cut tried to smile, then asked, "What's your genre, Kat?" "Romantic fantasy," Kat said, bracing herself. "I've never really written anything else." The woman shot Beatrix a long, unreadable look. "Bit of a detour from our mission, isn't it, Bea?" Kat bristled. Romance writers always got sneered at, but romantic fantasy? People acted like it was a punchline. Just because her hero grew fur and fangs once a month didn't make him less compelling. "Nonsense, Penelope," Beatrix snapped, her eyes gleaming with manic excitement. "Fresh perspectives are exactly what this group needs." The air thickened, pressing down on Kat like a heavy blanket. She forced a smile, but the chill from Beatrix's touch lingered in her bones. Beatrix led Kat to her room on the upper floor of the library. It looked like a converted office, small, windowless, lit by a single jaundiced bulb. One wall was lined with bookshelves, the other with a cheap dresser and a battered desk. The bed stood in the center, facing a door made of cloudy wood and frosted glass. Maybe this was what you got with the basic package, but after paying $5,000, Kat had expected more. Beatrix lingered in the doorway, still smiling. Kat noticed a bouquet of wildflowers in a vase shaped like a typewriter. Next to it sat a small white stone block. "Writer's block," Beatrix said with a giggle. "Today, you rest. Enjoy the grounds. Tomorrow the real work begins. No more writer's block, pinky promise. Meet us in the war room at 1 o'clock after lunch. I have something special planned." Kat nodded, then checked the bathroom, if you could call it that. Shower, toilet, sink, all crammed together in a space barely wider than her outstretched arms. Before Kat could ask if there'd been a mistake, an icy draft washed over her. Beatrix was gone. After a coffin-sized shower, Kat dressed and decided to take Beatrix's advice. She'd driven all the way from Illinois to Wyoming. Her legs needed stretching. On the bed sat a brochure labeled Reed's New Beginnings Retreat. She raised an eyebrow. The Facebook group had called it Reed's Writers Retreat. Was this a rebrand? She then scrolled down to the bottom, where it said, Seminar, Letting Go of the Past to Write Your Best Life. Workshop, How to Recognize Red Flags in Relationships. Okay. What the heck does red flags in relationships have to do with writing? Kat thought. Maybe this retreat was more than just a writing retreat. Maybe it was a support group. She perked up at the mention of a complimentary massage and facial. She bounced down the stairs, pausing to listen to the relentless clatter of typewriters below. The writers from earlier were scattered around the room, some hunched at desks, others slumped in battered chairs, all typing with a feverish, almost frantic intensity. Kat wished she could bottle that energy. No one looked up, except Penelope, who pinned her with a stare so urgent it bordered on desperate, hands still dancing across the keys. Kat looked away, shivering, and headed out. Aside from her disappointing room, the rest of the resort was immaculate. She spent the afternoon getting pampered and stuffing herself at the buffet. The other guests, all women, all in yoga pants, kept to themselves. The consummate eavesdropper that she was, she'd caught snippets of conversations which usually had something to do with a recent divorce. A woman with short auburn hair strode past, surrounded by a cluster of admirers. She looked eerily like Beatrix, but slimmer, her skin sun-kissed instead of corpse-pale. Suddenly, an idea wriggled into Kat's mind. What if her protagonist had a long-lost twin, threatening the wolf pack's balance? She fumbled for a pen, turned to an older woman at the next table. "Excuse me, do you have a pen?" The woman smiled, rummaged, and handed one over. "Are you going to the seminar tonight? I hear Kelly's got someone special coming." "Kelly?" The door slammed of its own accord, the hanging bulb flickered, and the table rattled. Beatrix's eyes glowed like headlights, her smile stretching impossibly wide. "I need you to write that same story again, a full-length novel this time." Her voice was silk over steel. "Meet your new editors. I trust you'll all create literary magic together." "Yes, Kelly Reed, the owner." Kat frowned. "I know Beatrix Reed. Haven't met Kelly. Is she a writer too?" The woman blinked rapidly, lips pressed thin. Kat scribbled her idea on a napkin and handed the pen back. The woman opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Kelly glided over, her movements gracefully smooth, and embraced her. "So good to see you again, Eloise." The two women sank into conversation, leaving Kat to wander back to her thoughts. She would have pressed for answers, but her mind was lost in plotting for her hero's next crisis. When she returned to her building, the sun was sinking. The typewriter clatter inside was as relentless as ever. Penelope's chair was empty. Tomorrow, Kat thought, I'll join them. At 1 o'clock, Kat found herself in the war room with the others, eager to discover their secret to such obsessive focus. Everyone was gathered around the long, battered table, but none wore Kat's hopeful expression. A skinny man with thick brows gave her a look of raw panic, his hands trembling. Then a frigid wind swept through, slamming the door shut. Beatrix appeared, her eyes too bright. "Welcome, everyone. As promised, I have a special surprise. On the table, you'll find the beginning of a story. Finish it in 5,000 words or less. You have 3 days. Our esteemed judges will choose the winner." Kat's heart sank. She wasn't here to ghostwrite for someone else. She'd paid for solitude, for her own work. Beatrix caught her disappointment. "Want to know what you're competing for?" Kat barely cared. "A full refund. And 10 more days, premium accommodations, plus $5,000. Okay, maybe she cared after all. Kat glanced around. No one looked excited. Penelope's eyes met hers, pleading. The man beside her, a balding black man, rubbed her back, staring at the table. Kat could use the money. She could use a little luck. Penelope seemed to see her as a threat, which stoked Kat's stubborn pride. She scanned the prompt, a romantic thriller, a widow hell-bent on vengeance against her husband's killer, only to fall for the man's father. "I'm in," Kat said, and it was settled. For 3 days, Kat wrote like a woman possessed. She barely slept, only pausing for food or to squeeze into the bath closet. Words poured from her, hot and frantic. On the 3rd day, Kat delivered her story to Beatrix, smouldering, complex, full of morally grey characters. Beatrix took the pages, her smile razor-sharp. "Best of luck. The winner will be announced tomorrow." A slow dread crept over Kat as she eyed the thick stack of other entries. Had she wasted precious time, stolen from her own story, for nothing? When she returned to her room, a note was taped to the door, typed in frantic caps. "Get out now while you still can. You are in danger." Irritated, Kat ripped it down, balled it up, and tossed it aside. The next day, Kat entered the war room, nerves buzzing. Beatrix beamed at her, and Kat felt a weird sense of relief. Kat sunk into a seat opposite Penelope. "Congratulations, Kat. You're our winner," Beatrix announced. "No," Penelope said softly. Her voice cracked a little. A surge of smug satisfaction swept through Kat. Beatrix's skirt swished as she left, returning with a bright blue typewriter. "I just knew you had what it took to be my new ghostwriter." Kat's stomach dropped as Beatrix sat the typewriter in front of her. "Excuse me?" Kat's skin prickled with cold. When she exhaled, her breath fogged the air. A single tear slipped down Penelope's cheek. "Beatrix, I'm not interested in ghostwriting. I came here for my own novel. I'll be leaving now." Beatrix's pupils burned, the whites of her eyes almost luminous. Her smile grew lupine, predatory. Kat started to cry. Something unnatural, something hideously wrong, was happening. Beatrix giggled and glided backwards, her feet hovering inches above the floor. The window shutters slammed shut. Kat spun around, but Beatrix had vanished. Then a chill breath pressed to Kat's nape, icy fingers teasing her skin. "Enjoy your stay, and let the creativity flow," Beatrix's disembodied voice whispered in her ear. Kat looked at Penelope, her throat tightening. "Penelope, what's going on?" Penelope's eyes shimmered with tears as she met Kat's gaze across the table. "That isn't just a block in your room. Those are Beatrix Reed's ashes. Writing the perfect story was her obsession, her life's mission. Not even death could stop her." Story 2. The Missing Boy. It was a rainy, tepid morning, the day that Ralphie Alcott walked into my office wearing tattered clothing and hooded eyes. He had been missing then for over 23 years, but at the time he was just another man I felt needed a shower and shave in the worst way. He walked in, sat down without my asking him to, and before I could say a word, he had thrown down a slim black book. As he looked at me as if I knew what should happen next, I noticed something that looked like crumbs were littered throughout his thick, overgrown beard. "Can I help you with something?" When he spoke, his voice was cracked and haggard, as if he smoked unfiltered cigarettes or didn't use his voice much. By the smell and his temperament, I feared both suppositions were correct. "You write an article recommending books. I would like you to recommend this one." I was taken aback, I have to admit. This simply wasn't etiquette. I also have to admit I didn't expect much from the slim volume resting on my wide executive desk. "I recommend books that I find to be exceptional and have a unique underlying voice. It is entirely at my discretion." The man just stared. I was determined not to break the silence, but after a full 2 minutes, it became apparent I was more uncomfortable with silence than him. "Tell me why I should recommend this book. Has it received much acclaim?" "This is the only copy." I couldn't help but chuckle while he remained stone-faced with perfect posture, looking for all the world like he had just emerged from the dump. "What is your name, by the way?" No response. It felt as if he was staring into my soul. I had the ridiculous thought that he could read my thoughts. I was planning to end this little oddity and lifted my finger to call security when, without emotion, he said, "The Alcott family, including Senator Preston Alcott, has been kidnapping children and adults since the turn of the 20th century. In this book you will find proof of that and much more. You may not believe it at first, but if you investigate you will glimpse true evil." I noticed that he spoke with an eloquence far beyond what his appearance indicated. Still, I felt it much more likely I was dealing with a man who was simply mentally ill. "Senator Alcott kidnapping children, huh? And why should I believe this?" "Because I have been investigating them my entire life." "Then why self-publish this book, then hand it over to me to receive the credit?" I thought I saw his eyes sparkle then. "Because you can disseminate this to a wider audience, and I have read your articles and seen some of the public conflicts you've been involved in. You don't back down. You seem to be a true journalist, which are exceedingly rare now." So, he had done his research, this disheveled stranger, I thought. I couldn't help but be intrigued. He had piqued my interest, and I caught myself staring at the cover of the book, wanting to read it and determine if it was all garbled nonsense or something sensational as this man alluded to. "Will you do this for me?" I considered it. I only gave 3 recommendations each week, and I had already chosen my selections for Monday morning's edition of the paper. Luckily, I had caught my editor banging an intern in the parking garage one evening outside the office. If I wanted to, I could put any old trash in my article. He brought me out of my reverie when he spoke again. "If you will not, I have to find someone else." He narrowed his eyes at me. I often think back to that moment when my life altered, when my curiosity overtook me and I took a chance on a homeless man with a self-published volume. "Yes," was all I said. At that, he pushed himself up out of his chair, and for the first time I noticed his stride was slightly off balance, an old injury perhaps that still haunted him. "Oh, hold on, please. How can I contact you? Can you give me your name and number, please?" I was pleading. His back was turned, and he was trudging away, but I still heard his response. "It's something I am still here in my nightmares from time to time. No use. I will be dead by this time tomorrow." I called out once more, pleading for him to stop and for me to give me his name. He didn't turn or pause. He walked right out of my office, and I never saw him again. When I got home that night, I took a walk with my Rhodesian Ridgeback Cletus, then hopped in the shower. I dried off, sat down in my favorite chair in my living room with a glass of bourbon on ice. I pulled out the book that my nameless stranger had given me. The first 2 pages were simply blank, then the 3rd page titled Alcott in Gothic bold lettering. I took a sip of bourbon and felt the comforting warmth cascade through me. I turned the page. Above the text was the first chapter or part titled Family. It went on to describe how the Alcott family came to set roots down in the then rural hill country town of Colburn, Texas. The Alcotts, who hailed from Great Britain, were apparently wealthy before they arrived in Texas, although their time in England was shrouded in mystery. The family members going back 4 generations were listed on a large tree, hand-drawn with considerable skill, in the first chapter. The family was full of the normal amount of ne'er-do-wells, burnouts, and golden children seen in every family, although this one seemed especially competitive and ruthless. I noticed that this had to be from the point of view of someone who was an actual family member. The more I read, the more I was convinced of this. The last sentence of what I assumed was part 1 of the book left me dumbstruck. It read, "My name is Ralphie Alcott. I have been missing for over 23 years, and now that you know the real Alcotts, I can show you what they've done." The next page was titled Ceremony. I had long since forgotten my now watered-down bourbon drink. I was enraptured by the book in my hands. I felt I was holding classified information, and that at some point the print on the page would simply disappear, and I would be left tired and confused. Instead, Ralphie described that his family had been involved in occult rituals with other elite members of a private group, cult, called the Order of Hecate. They believed that Hecate demanded sacrifice at the conclusion of elaborate rituals that involved everything from torture, sex, drug use, possession, seances, and savage fights to the death. The group used its power to kidnap prostitutes, drug addicts, and innocent immigrants for use in the sadistic rituals that took place in Colburn at the vast Alcott estate. Ralphie claimed to have been present for these rituals and even witnessed full-body apparitions appear and communicate with members of the Order of Hecate, whether through possession, automatic writing, or actual speech. He explained that each ceremony was carried out with precision and fastidious detail. At the helm of these ceremonies was his father, who was then just the district attorney of Colburn County. He ruled both the Order of Hecate and his house as a mad tyrant, responsible for countless deaths, many of which Ralphie claimed to have witnessed. That poor boy, I thought. I suddenly understood that Ralphie Alcott must have chosen to stay missing for as long as he did. He traded rags for riches to leave his evil family. An image of Preston Alcott on a podium orating with great passion about public health and immigration, appearing to all the world as a clean-cut moderate who had America's best interest at heart. He was a dark horse for the presidency in 2 years, according to CNN at least. I continued reading without a notion of what time it was or the rumbling deep in my stomach. The last section of the book was titled Death. It described in detail where the bodies of the kidnapped, tortured, and defiled victims of the Alcott cult were buried. It also indicated that Alcott and the followers of the Order of Hecate tend to live longer than most human beings as a result of their covenant with the ancient god. Once they reach a certain age, however, they adopt alternative aliases that provide them with anonymity. This is of course sanctioned by high-ranking officials in government and the private sector. He indicated that if the Order of Hecate is not destroyed, many more individuals will be corrupted or killed behind a veil of power that is centuries old. Lastly, he indicated that if he should die, it was not to be taken as suicide. Ralphie Alcott had eluded his father and the Order for 23 years, but he knew as soon as this was published, he would be hunted and killed. He ended it by saying to anyone who reads this, "My hope lies in your hands." I finished reading as sunlight reached through the blinds in my living room. Luckily, it was Saturday. I found I had a numb backside and biting hunger. I also knew I had something particularly important to see to. I brewed a big pot of coffee which went into a cup I could take on the road and grabbed a protein bar on my way out. I was out the door and driving down the highway within 20 minutes of finishing Ralphie's book. I sped through traffic and almost missed the turnoff. I pulled into a long private drive that led to 2 towering black iron gates. I drove up to the keypad, but before I could press the call button, I heard a loud groan coming from just in front of my car. It was the gates opening. I looked around for a moment, then drove through the gate. The rest of the meandering driveway that was bordered by tall pines on either side, standing sentinel in the mid-morning Texas heat. I ended up in front of a vast estate. I saw a golf course, tennis courts, over-the-top landscaping, naked baby statues arranged tastefully amongst the azaleas, tulips, and roses. To top it off, there were gargoyles, or what appeared to me as gargoyles, sitting on the corners of the roofline. A butler was already standing outside the door with his nose pointed ever so slightly skyward, letting me know where I was. When I walked up the stone steps, he only offered a curt "this way." Then I was off down several corridors, and everything was sparkling wood and the scent of freedom and peace. A right here, then a left, then a right, then a long walk down the widest hallway I have ever seen. He stopped outside a door and seemed to freeze in time. I was unsure what to do, which of course he sensed. "Please, Senator Alcott is a busy man, sir." My heart jumped into my throat and began beating at a hummingbird's pace. I opened the door and walked in. "Ah, Samuel, you're early." I'm sure there is a version of this world in which Ralphie Alcott uncovered what the Order is and its doings throughout these many years. Unfortunately, when I pledged my life to Hecate many years ago and saw the rewards, assistant editor of a major media company at age 26 and soon to be editor, I also pledged to stamp out any fool who would stand in her way. To say the book should never have come into the world is a severe understatement. Poor Ralphie. His father and I watched it burn in the senator's study. As we watched it closely, sweating despite the AC, I felt him clap me on the back. "Congratulations on the new job, Editor-in-Chief." It's late. The darkness envelops us. We are many, but joined as one in our great purpose. We stand naked, hands held in the courtyard of Alcott's estate. Screams echo through the night, appealing to a stoic, uncaring, full-faced moon. The nameless, faceless sacrifices are being bled. We will bathe in their blood and perform the rituals to summon the old gods. Hecate will lay us upon her bosom while the outside world remains as it should, deaf and dumb. Ralphie Alcott was never found. There was a man identified and cremated as Peter Johnson. He died of an apparent suicide in a motel in the part of town where officers turned the other way in exchange for more stripes on their sleeve. There was one man, dirty and stinking, who stood just outside of the circle of paramedics and police as they loaded Peter Johnson into the ambulance on a stretcher. No one paid much attention to him. Just another homeless guy begging and taking up space. He staggered away, peering around and handling with care a small black book with a single name printed on the slim spine.